Greetings of the day to all my dear students. I hope that you all are in good health. 10 things that require zero talent: being on time, work ethic, effort, body language, energy, attitude, passion, being coachable, doing extra, and being prepared. This is Shreya Jadhav welcoming you all to my e-learning channel. And today we are going to do English Grade 12, Chapter 5 Indigo, written by Louis Fisher. This is part 2 of Chapter 5. So, before starting with the reading and explanation of the chapter, let us know something about the author. Louis Fisher, born on 29 February 1896, died 15th January 1970, was an American journalist. Among his works were a contribution to the ex-communist treatise The God That Failed in 1949, A Life of Mahatma Gandhi in 1950, basis for the Academy Award winning film Gandhi in 1982. Louis Fisher was an American journalist. In 1965, he won the National Book Award in History and Biography. Introduction for answer. Dear students, always remember that whenever you are writing down answers, start your answer with introduction. This creates a good impact. So here it is. Prose name Indigo, author's name Louis Fisher, genre story, summary. The narrator narrates Gandhiji's struggle at Champaran for the poor people. The peasants at Champaran were sharecroppers with British planters. So, now we shall start with the summary of the chapter. Indigo is written by Louis Fisher, who narrates Gandhiji's struggle at Champaran for the poor people. The peasants at Champaran were sharecroppers with British planters. The peasants produced indigo on 15% of the land area, and according to an old agreement, they had to give it as rent to the landlords. It was around 1917 the Germans started developing synthetic indigo, and this mitigated the requirement of indigo for British planter. In order to release the peasants from the 15% of old agreement, the Britishers demanded compensation from them. Most of the illiterate peasants agreed it to except a few. During that period, Gandhiji appeared at Champaran. He looked into the matter, stood by the side of the poor peasants, and fought a long battle of 1 year, managing to get justice for them. This made the peasants courageous and made them aware of their fundamental rights. Gandhiji's work at Champaran didn't just confine to political or economic just struggle. He also worked on social issues like arrangement for education, health and hygiene for the families and poor peasants. He taught them the lessons of self-reliance and self-dependence. This was the first struggle that paved the way for India's independence. The story describes Gandhiji's struggle for the poor peasants of Champaran. In those days, most of the arable land in Champaran district was divided into large estates. owned by the Englishman and worked by the Indian tenants. The chief commercial crop was indigo. The landlords compelled all tenants to plant 15% of their indigo crop any more than Germany and surrender the entire indigo harvest as rent. This was done by a long term contract. The British didn't need indigo crop anymore when Germany had developed synthetic indigo. Just to release the peasants from 15% of agreement, they demanded compensation. Some illiterate peasants agreed, but the others refused. One of the sharecroppers, named Rajkumar Shukla, met Gandhiji in this regard and compelled him to visit Champaran because of the long term injustice of landlords. Then the two of them boarded a train for the city of Patna in Bihar. From there, Shukla led him to the house of lawyer named Rajendra Prasad. Mahatma Gandhi's humble and simple attire made the servants mistook him as another poor peasant. He surveyed before taking any vital step in order to get those peasants justice. It was the time when British government punished those who in any condition gave shelter to the national leaders or protesters. Gandhiji's arrival and the nature of his mission spread like a wildfire. Many lawyers and peasant groups came in large number to support him. The lawyers accepted the fact that their charges were high and for poor peasant it will be irksome. Gandhiji rebuked them for collecting high fees for the sharecroppers. He stressed on counseling as this would give the peasants enough confidence to fight their fear. He managed to get justice after year-long battle for the peasants. He also made arrangements for education, health, and hygiene for the families of the poor peasants. He gave them the lesson of self reliance. So, dear students, this is all about the summary of the chapter. Now, we shall start with the second part of reading and explanation of the chapter. So, here we go. Gandhiji did not leave. Instead, he proceeded to Motihari, the capital of Champaran. Several lawyers accompanied him. At the railway station, a vast multitude greeted Gandhi. He went to a house and, using it as headquarters, continued his investigations. A report came in that a peasant had been maltreated in a nearby village. Gandhi decided to go and see the next morning. He started out on the back of an elephant. He had not proceeded far when the police superintendent's messenger overtook him and ordered him to return to town in his carriage. Gandhi compiled. The messenger drove Gandhi home, where he served him with an official notice to quit Champaran immediately. Gandhi signed a receipt for the notice and wrote on it that he would disobey the order. So now, eventually, what happened? That Gandhiji stayed over there in Motihari and he was staying with the people. When other people came to know from Motihari as well as from Champaran that Gandhiji was staying over here to fight for the peasants' right, different lawyers and everybody have gathered. And then he got some news that there was a peasant who was beaten up. So he decided to go. At that time, he was being stopped. He was not being permitted to move out from the place. And an a British official, a messenger came, and he told that now he was supposed to he was not allowed to move to go to that person to watch him. Moreover to that, he was supposed to leave Champaran immediately. There was an official notice which came. Gandhiji signed the official notice which came, and he wrote on it that he would be disobeying the order. In consequence, Gandhi received a summons to appear in court the next day. All right, Gandhi remained awake. He telegraphed Rajendra Prasad to come from Bihar with influential friends. He sent instructions to the ashram. He wired a full report to the viceroy. So eventually, what happened as he disobeyed the order which the British official gave him? There was a consequences that Gandhiji had received a summons that he is supposed to appear in the court the very next day. So all night Gandhiji remained awake and he telegraphed his companion Rajendra Prasad to come from Bihar with his influential friends, and he sent instructions to the ashram also. He wired a full report to viceroy also. Morning found the town of Motihari black with peasants. They did not know Gandhi's record in South Africa. They had merely had heard that Mahatma, who wanted to help them, was in trouble with the authorities. Their spontaneous demonstration in thousands around the courthouse was the beginning of their liberation from fear of the British. The officials felt powerless without Gandhiji's cooperation. He helped them regulate the crowd. He was their might hitherto dread and unquestioned could be challenged by Indians. So by morning it was that the Motihari had all the blacks with peasant, means there was a huge crowd of all the peasants, and those people didn't knew about the record which Gandhiji used to have in South Africa. They just merely knew that there was a Mahatma, there was a person who had come here to help them. And now that person was in trouble with the authorities. And their spontaneous demonstration in thousands around the courthouse was the beginning of their liberalization. That how they had made themselves fearless from the Britishers. The official felt powerless without Gandhiji's cooperation. He helped them regulate the crowd. He was polite and friendly. He was giving them concrete proof that their might, that dreaded and unquestioned, could be challenged by Indians. The government was baffled. The prosecutor requested the judge to postpone the trial. Apparently, the authorities wished to consult their superiors. Gandhi protested against the delay. He read a statement pleading guilty. He was involved, he told the court, in conflicts of duty on the one hand, not to set a bad example as a lawbreaker, on the other hand, to render the humanitarian and national service for which he had come. He disregarded the order to leave, not for want of respect for lawful authority, but in obedience to higher law of our being, the voice of conscience. He asked the penalty due. So eventually, the prosecutor over there, he was now baffled. He thought that what this mere peasant looking person, a simple looking person, would able to do. But eventually he then asked that they needed more time to fetch and get informations, and moreover to that, to help them to get other clues which would help them. But Gandhiji requested that this the decision they are supposed to declare right now only, because then it would be considered as conflict of duties, and he told that not to set a bad example as law breakers. And on the other hand, there would be chances to render the humanitarian and national service rights, and he asked for the penalty due also. The magistrate announced that he would pronounce a sentence after 2 hour recess and asked Gandhiji to furnish bail for those 120 minutes. Gandhi refused. The judge released him without bail. When the court reconvened, the judge said he would not deliver the judgment for several days. Meanwhile, he allowed Gandhi to remain at liberty. So now the magistrate announced that he would give his final judgment after 2 hours of recess, and he asked Gandhiji that he should search for a bail for within those 120 minutes. Gandhiji refused, and he was being released without bail. The court gave the statement. The judge said that he would not give the judgment at the present moment. He would need some several days to find out a solution. Rajendra Prasad, Brij Kishore Babu, Maulana Mazharul Haq, and several other prominent lawyers had arrived from Bihar. They conferred with Gandhi. What would they do if he was sentenced to prison? Gandhi asked. Why, the senior lawyer replied. They had come to advise and help them. If he went to jail, there would be nobody to advise and they would go home. So now from Bihar, Rajendra Prasad, Brij Kishore Babu, and Maulana Mazharul Haq and other prominent lawyers have come and arrived from Bihar. They all conferred with Gandhi, and everyone was sentenced to prison. Now, what about the injustice to the sharecroppers? Gandhi demanded. The lawyers withdrew to consult. Rajendra Prasad has recorded the upshot for their consultants. They thought among themselves that Gandhi was totally a stranger, and yet he was prepared to go to prison for the sake of peasants. If they, on the other hand, being not only residents of adjoining districts, but also those who claimed to have served their peasants, should go home, it would be shameful desertion. They accordingly went back to Gandhi and told him they were ready to follow him into jail. The battle of Champaran is won, he exclaimed. Then he took a piece of paper and divided the group into pairs and put down the order in which each pair was to court arrest. So now eventually what happened? That slowly and gradually the court were arresting the people, the peasants, and they were sent and made prisoners. Now they all were thinking that a person who does not even belong to this place, and he himself is fighting and going to jail for the peasants, then there should be other people also. And then every people realized that if this man can do, then it is possible for us to do too. And then they all got together, and they decided that they will follow Gandhiji into jail. And then the battle of Champaran was won, they exclaimed. And he took a piece of paper and he divided the group into different pairs and how they were supposed to arrest themselves. Several days later, Gandhi received a written communication from the magistrate informing him that the lieutenant governor of the province had ordered the case to be dropped. Civil disobedience had triumphed, the first time in modern India. Gandhi and the lawyers now proceeded to conduct a fair flung inquiry into the grievance of the farmers. Depositions by about 10,000 peasants were written down, and notes made on the other evident. Documents were collected. The whole area throbbed in with the activity of the investigators and the vehement protesters of the landlords. In June, Gandhi was summoned by Sir Edward Gate, the lieutenant governor. Before he went, he met the leading associates and again laid detailed plans for civil disobedience if he should not return. So now, evidently, they all were into jail, and there he got a written communication letter from the magistrate that now he will be means he was trying to make a civil disobedient movement for all people, and slowly and gradually all people gathered over there and they made a great change. And then all the detailed plans of civil disobedient movements were given, and if Gandhiji would not return from jail, then other people would continue this movement. Gandhi had four protracted interviews with Lieutenant Governor, who, as a result, appointed an official commission of inquiry into the Indigo sharecroppers' situation. The commission consisted of landlords, government officials, and Gandhi as a sole representative of the peasants. Gandhi remained in Champaran for an initial uninterrupted period of 7 months and then again for several shorter visits. The visits undertaken casually on the entreaty of an unlettered peasant in the exception that it would last a few days occupied almost a year of Gandhi's life. So now eventually a commission was being set up and four uh, protracted interviews with the lieutenant governor were set up. There were different official commissioners, there were so many people appointed for there, and Gandhiji was the only one who was the sole representative or who was speaking on the behalf of the peasant. Gandhiji remained in Champaran for initial 7 months, and then he used to visit for several shorter visits, and usually they all were unlettered peasants, and the exception that it would last for few days only, but it occupied almost a year of Gandhiji's life. The official inquiry assembled a crushing mountain of evidence against a big planter, and when they saw this they agreed in principle to make refunds to the peasants. But how much must we pay? They asked Gandhi. They thought he would demand repayment in full of the money which they had illegally and deceitfully extorted from the sharecropper. He asked only 50%. There he seemed adamant. Writes Reverend J. said Hodge, a British missionary in Champaran who observed the entire episode at closer range, thinking probably that he would not give away. The representatives of the planters offered to refund to extent of 25%. And to his amazement, Mr. Gandhi took him at his word, thus breaking the deadlock. So eventually, an official inquiry was set up, and all big planters came and they agreed that they would refund to the peasants. But how much they will be paying? At first, people thought that no, the full payment they would get. But Gandhiji decided that he would ask only for the 50% of the total, And at that time, the Reverend J. Z. Hodge, a British missionary in Champaran, he observed this entire episode with a very close range. And he thought that he was not actually the representative of the planters because he refunded to an extent of 25%. This settlement was adopted unanimously by the Commission. Gandhi explained that the amount of refund was less important than the fact that landlords had been obliged to surrender the part of money and with it part of their prestige. Therefore, as far as the peasants were concerned, the planters had behaved as lords above the law. Now the peasant saw that he had rights and defenders. He learned courage. Events justified Gandhiji's position. Within few years, the British planters abandoned their estates, which reverted to the peasants. Indigo sharecropping disappeared. Gandhi never contented himself with large political or economic solution. He saw the cultural and social backwardness in the Champaran village and wanted to do something about it immediately. He appealed to do something about it. He appealed for teachers, Mahadev Desai, Narhari Parikh, the two young men who had just joined Gandhi as disciples, and their wives volunteered for the work. Several more came from Bombay, Pune, and other distinct parts of the land. So now, eventually, Gandhiji was not focusing more on money, but his attention was more on how these people can actually change their life, not on the basis of having materialistic goods, but also they are one who are supposed to fight for their rights. And slowly and gradually, he decided that now that change, that mindset change should also come. And within few time, Gandhiji called for Mahadev Desai and Narhari Parikh, who were the two young men who had recently joined Gandhi as their disciple, and their wives had also come for no upbringing of the Champaran district. Many other volunteers from Bombay, Pune, and other places come voluntarily. Devdas, Gandhi's youngest son, arrived from ashram, and so did Mrs. Gandhi. Primary schools were opened in 6 villages. Kasturbai taught the ashram rules on the personal cleanliness and community sanitation. Health conditions were miserable. Gandhi got a doctor to volunteer his services for 6 months. 3 medicines were available: castor oil, quinine, and sulfur ointment. Anybody who showed a coated tongue was given a dose of castor oil. Anybody with malaria fever received quinine pulse castor oil. Anybody with skin eruption received the ointment plus castor oil. Gandhi noticed the fleecy state of women's clothes. He asked Kasturbai to talk to them about it. One woman took Kasturbai into her hut and said, "Look, there is no box or cupboard here for clothes. The sari I am wearing is only one I have." So now the health condition of that district was very miserable. The doctors came for voluntary services for 6 months, and whatever disease the people used to suffer, all the facilities were provided to them. Moreover to that, Gandhiji noticed the fleecy states of women's clothing also. He told Kasturbai to have a word and talk to all the women. And one of the women took Kasturbai into her hut and said, "Look, here there is no box or here there is no cupboard to keep clothes." Why? Because she had only one sari which she was wearing. During his long stay in Champaran, Gandhi kept a long distance watch on the ashram. He sent regular instruction by mail and asked for the financial accounts. Once he wrote to the resident that it was the time to fill the old latrine trenches and dig new ones, otherwise, the old ones would begin to smell bad. So, although he used to stay in Champaran for a longer time duration, he was also taking care of his ashram. A long term distance watch was kept. The Champaran episode was turning point in Gandhi's life. What I did, he explained, was a very ordinary thing. I declared that the British could not order me about my own country. But Champaran did not begin as an act of defense. It grew out of an attempt to alleviate the distress of large numbers of poor peasants. This was the typical Gandhi pattern. His politics were intertwined with the practical day to day problems of the millions. His was not a loyalty to abstractions, it was a loyalty to living human beings. In everything Gandhi did, moreover, he tried to mold a new free Indian who could stand on his feet and thus make India free. So it was that the Champaran episode was turning point in Gandhiji's life. Moreover to that, he told that every ordinary things could be changed into extraordinary, and no one had that authority and audacity to tell him. Specifically, the Britishers had no right to tell him or tell anybody to do what they need to do for their own country. Moreover to that, it was a typical Gandhi pattern that his politics were intervened with the practical day to day problems of the millions. His was a loyalty of abstraction and the loyalty to living human beings. In everything Gandhi did, moreover, he tried to mold a free new Indian could stand on his own feet and thus made India free. Early in Champaran action, Charles Ferrer Andrews, the English pacifist who had come to devote a devoted follower of Mahatma, came to bid Gandhi farewell before going to the tour of duty to the Fiji island. Gandhi's lawyer's friend thought it would be a good idea for Andrews to stay in Champaran and help them. Andrews was willing if Gandhi agreed, but Gandhiji was vehemently opposed. He said, "You think that it is this unequal fight, it would be helpful if you have an Englishman on our side. This shows the weakness of our heart. The cause is just, and you must rely upon yourselves to win a battle. You should not seek a prop in Mr. Andrews because he happens to be an Englishman." He had read our minds correctly, Rajendra Prasad comments, and we had no reply. Gandhi, in this way, taught us a lesson of self reliance, Indian independence, and helped sharecroppers were all bound together. So, Gandhiji taught the nation that how the Indians can become self reliant, could have their self confidence, and they can fight for their own duty and authority. So this is all about the chapter. I hope that every one of you have understood it. Thank you for watching and have a nice day.